President Trump urges Portland, Oregon to, quote, bring in the National Guard. The mayor and governor are putting people's lives at risk. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about Portland, Oregon. For almost 3 months now, the rioters, including Antifa, have been besieging the federal courthouse in Portland and trying to burn it to the ground. Federal law enforcement has been protecting the courthouse. And in the meantime, the rioters are all over the city, and they recently tried to burn down the local police union building. And I think this is completely outrageous. President Trump is blasting the rioters and telling the mayor of Portland and the governor of Oregon to get this thing under control and to call in the National Guard. Enough is enough. You can't just have open rebellion in the streets of American cities and not have the National Guard be called in. This is totally ridiculous. And they are politically basically favoring the rioters and saying, oh, well, we got to let them run around and burn everything to the ground, and we're not going to do what is necessary to protect our cities. And I think that is completely outrageous. Democratic liberal mayors and governors are abandoning their people and abandoning their cities and just saying to let the rebels have it. And I think this is really, really dangerous, and it's going to basically encourage other significant protests and riots around the country if it's not brought to heel. And I think that's why President Trump is speaking out on this. On Twitter, President Trump says, quote, Portland, which is out of control, should finally, after almost 3 months, bring in the National Guard. The mayor and governor are putting people's lives at risk. They will be held responsible. The Guard is ready to act immediately. The courthouse is secured by Homeland Security, the Department of Homeland Security. And a riot was declared in this city. And let's take a look at the local Fox affiliate in Oregon. And you also get some images of what's going on with these riots.
A group gathered at that building on North Lombard around 10:30 last night, setting dumpsters on fire and spray painting the building. People there then broke a window, entered that building, and started a fire inside. This is security video from inside the Portland Police Association office. Just after 11:30 p.m., officers declared a riot, and state troopers were then brought in to help push out that crowd, using flashbangs and smoke canisters to clear out the group. As officers marched down Lombard Street, they were hit with fireworks, rocks, and balloons filled with paint. We do know at least 3 officers were hurt last night, and police say several arrests were also made.
And so that's absolutely outrageous. The local police are being besieged, and the mayor and the governor don't want to do anything to help by way of bringing in the National Guard, which is probably necessary at this point. Federal law enforcement officials, including U.S. Marshals, have had to defend the Marco Hatfield Federal Courthouse from violent protesters and rioters, including Antifa, who have been attempting to burn it down ever since the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis police custody. And as the situation was escalating, Portland police, about the PPA, the police association, they issued a statement stating, quote, those near the PPA office do not engage in criminal activities, including but not limited to vandalism, unlawful entry to the building, or fire starting. Failure to adhere to this order may subject you to arrest and or the use of crowd control munitions and or tear gas. So the police are, I think, doing everything they possibly can, but I don't think they're getting the support that they deserve from the mayor and from the governor. Portland Democratic Mayor Ted Wheeler, I think he had a mixed message for rioters. On August 7th, he was basically stating that, you're attempting murder. Here he says, quote, you are not demonstrating, you are attempting to commit murder. But then on the other hand, he goes on to say that you're helping President Trump. Quote, don't think for a moment that if you are participating in this activity, you are not being a prop for the re-election campaign of Donald Trump, because you absolutely are. And if you don't want to be a part of that, then don't show up. So he's trying to take the politics of it, saying, oh, you want to go protest Donald Trump, but you're helping him get reelected. Well, but they're, on the other hand, he's saying that you're attempting murder. They're trying to kill people. So if that's the case and they can't stop the rioters, then call in the National Guard. But no, Mayor Wheeler and Governor Kate Brown, Democratic governor, are not putting the National Guard on the streets to restore order to the situation. Maybe they're worried that might help President Trump too. And how does that work? Anyways, this gives the appearance that Wheeler and Brown are making life and death decisions based upon whether or not it's going to help President Trump to protect government government buildings and the police association. And he's issuing this statement, Wheeler, as rioters were converging on a local police precinct, just like they did in Seattle. And I just find this to be absolutely outrageous. And you know what? That's what it looks like to the American people, too. Rasmussen Reports had a poll on July 31 that they published that 50% of likely U.S. voters believe political leaders, quote, in some major cities like Portland and Seattle are encouraging violent protests by limiting the police response. 31% disagree. A sizable 19% aren't sure. But when you look at those who say of the 50%, 72% of Republicans are saying that political leaders in Seattle and Portland want this to be occurring and that they're limiting police response. 33% of Democrats also agree, and 48% of unaffiliated voters agree. So basically, that's a huge majority where once you take out the people who are not really sure about the issue, of those who did have a response, that's a pretty sizable number there. And I think that really probably portends very well for President Trump's reelection if it's going to come down to law and order. And there's no reason for people to kind of stand up and say, yeah, we support these riots, burn the police to the ground, or anything like that. In testimony before the House Judiciary Committee on July 28th, Attorney General William Barr was blasting the violence. And I think he's absolutely right. We need to restore law and order. This isn't a political issue. This is an issue of national security. Let's take a listen to that.
Unfortunately, some have chosen to respond to George Floyd's death in a far less productive way by demonizing the police, promoting slogans like "all cops are bastard," and making grossly irresponsible proposals to defund the police. The demonization of the police is not only unfair and inconsistent with principles of all people should be treated as individuals, but gravely injurious to the inner city communities. When communities turn on and pillory the police, officers naturally become more risk averse and crime rates soar. Unfortunately, we are seeing that now in many of our cities. The threat to Black lives posed by crime on the streets is massively greater than any threat posed by police misconduct. The leading cause of death for young Black males is homicide. Every year, approximately 7,500 Black Americans are victims of homicide. The vast majority of them, around 90%, are killed by other Blacks, mainly by gunfire. Each of those lives matter. It is for this reason that in selected cities where there has been an upsurge in violent crime, we are stepping up and bolstering the activities of our joint anti-crime task forces. Finally, I want to address a different breakdown in the rule of law that we've witnessed over the past 2 months. In the wake of George Floyd's death, violent rioters and anarchists have hijacked legitimate protests to wreak senseless havoc and destruction on innocent victims. The current situation in Portland is a telling example. Every night for the past 2 months, a mob of hundreds of rioters have laid siege to the federal courthouse and other nearby federal property. The rioters have come equipped for fight, armed with powerful slingshots, tasers, sledgehammers, saws, knives, rifles, and explosive devices. Inside the courthouse are a relatively small number of federal law enforcement personnel charged with a defensive mission to protect the courthouse. What unfolds nightly around the courthouse cannot reasonably be called protest. It is, by any objective measure, an assault on the government of the United States.
An assault on the government of the United States. This is open rebellion in the streets of America, and President Trump and the governors and the mayors across the country have a responsibility to restore law and order. So Attorney General Barr is absolutely right. President Trump is absolutely right. Since that testimony on July 28th, on July 29th, Governor Brown, Kate Brown, was trying to say that federal law enforcement was withdrawing from Portland. She's trying to get rioters to calm down. Quote, after my discussions with VP Pence and others, the federal government has agreed to withdraw federal officers from Portland. They have acted as an occupying force and brought violence. Starting tomorrow, all Customs and Border Patrol and ICE officers will leave downtown Portland. But according to the Homeland Security Secretary, Acting Secretary Wolf, quote, our entire law enforcement enforcement presence in Portland yesterday and the previous week will remain in Portland until we are sure that the courthouse and other federal facilities will no longer be attacked nightly and set afire. DHS law enforcement that are there today will remain in Portland until we are sure that the Oregon State Police and plans that the government has put into place are successful. And asked whether there was daylight between his comments and Brown's, Wolf said, quote, the entire DHS law enforcement presence will remain in Portland. So there you go, Governor Brown. And President Trump is confirming this, where he says that, quote, the courthouse is secured by Homeland Security. That's the Department of Homeland Security. And, they're not going to just leave if the state is not going to protect these buildings, if the city is not going to protect these buildings. And under 10 U.S.C. Section 252, President Trump could actually activate the National Guard inside of Oregon and in Portland, whether Governor Brown wants to do that or not. Quote, whenever the president considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use of such armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws and to suppress the rebellion. And so I think that them's fighting words. President Trump, he wants to get the National Guard involved, and the governor doesn't want to do that. And in the past, this is, why this law was enacted. It was enacted in 1792. It was updated in 1795, also in 1807 as the Insurrection Act, also in 1861, and then again in 1956. And President Abraham Lincoln actually utilized this section of law to wage the Civil War. This was a proclamation by President Lincoln on April 15th, 1861. Quote, whereas the laws of the United States have been for some time passed and now are opposed, and the execution thereof obstructed in the states of South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas by combinations too powerful to be suppressed by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings or by the powers vested in the marshals by law, now I therefore, Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, in virtue of the power in me vested by the constitutions and laws, have thought fit to call forth, and hereby do call forth, the militia of the several states of the Union to the aggregate number of 75,000 in order to suppress said combinations and to cause the laws to be duly executed. Now, again, in 1957, President Eisenhower similarly used this section of law when the Arkansas governor was trying to use the National Guard to block implementation of Brown v. Board of Education. Eisenhower stepped in and said, no, I'm activating federal control over the National Guard in Arkansas, and we're going to enforce Brown v. Board of Education. Quote, whereas certain persons in the state of Arkansas individually and in unlawful assemblages, combinations, and conspiracies have willfully obstructed the enforcement of orders of the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Arkansas with respect to matters relating to enrollment and attendance at public schools, particularly at Central High School located in Little Rock School District, Little Rock, Arkansas, and whereas such willful obstruction of justice hinders the execution of the laws of that state and of the United States and makes it impracticable to enforce such laws by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, and whereas such obstruction of justice constitutes a denial of the equal protection of the laws secured by the Constitution of the United States and impedes the course of justice under those laws, now therefore I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, President of the United States, under and by virtue of the authority vested in me by the Constitution and statutes of the United States, including Chapter 15, Title 10, U.S. Code, particularly Sections 332, 333, and 334, do command all persons engaged in such obstruction of justice to cease and desist therefrom and to disperse forthwith. And here he quotes the same exact section of law that President Trump has access to, and he could just bring in the National Guard, quote, whenever the president considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state or territory by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws and or to suppress the rebellion. And so again, 1957, 1861, and 2020. Can this be happening again in the United States of America? That's up to President Trump. If the situation in Portland or Seattle, for that matter, is not brought under control, it may be that you have to call in the National Guard to get this thing under control. And I'll leave you with the close here, which Brown and Wheeler may simply lack the political will to do what is necessary to preserve law and order for fear it might help President Trump politically. That's just too bad, though. Governor Brown and Mayor Wheeler must realize that if they refuse to restore civil order, President Trump is more than willing to step in and do it for them. He's threatened it once. I'm sure that if this doesn't get under control, he'll do it again. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government. DailyTorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.